The silence was the loudest thing in the room. It was a specific kind of silence, the kind that cost $400 a plate. It lived 95 floors above the Chicago sprawl, in the refrigerated air of the Pinnacle restaurant. It was a silence woven from the muted clink of silver on porcelain, the hushed reverence of wealth, and the unspoken agreement that life's ugly noises, its chaos, its pain had no place here. For former Captain Ethan Hayes of the United States Marine Corps, the silence was a tactical failure. It was a vacuum, and his mind, trained for combat, was filling it with ghosts. The screech of tires on wet asphalt, the crystalline shatter of a windshield, the small, terrified cry that had been the last sound he'd heard before the world went black. Lily, napkin. His voice was low, a command, not a suggestion. Across the table, his 7-year-old daughter flinched, her bright blue eyes dropping from the panoramic view of the city lights. She carefully picked up the heavy linen napkin and placed it on her lap. Her movements were precise, rehearsed, but hampered by the intricate metal brace that encased her right leg from thigh to ankle. This was a mistake. Bringing her here was a mistake. It was their first dinner out in over a year, an attempt at normalcy his therapist had insisted upon. Reintegration, the man had called it. Ethan called it a breach of protocol. Here, there were too many variables. The maitre d', whose smile didn't reach his eyes. The couple at the next table, whispering behind their wine glasses. The city itself, a glittering predator outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Every glance at Lily was a fresh wave of guilt. He saw the accident in the subtle drag of her foot, in the careful way she angled her chair. His fault, his mission failure. Since that day, he had constructed a world for her, of absolute control. The best doctors, the best tutors. A penthouse where every surface was padded, every corner rounded. A gilded cage designed to keep her safe, to atone for his sin. But in his obsession to prevent her from ever falling again, he had forgotten to teach her how to get up. A soft melody began to drift from the grand piano in the corner. A gentle, soulful jazz piece. Ethan watched as Lily's head turned towards the sound. A flicker of something he hadn't seen in a long time. Pure, uncalculated interest danced in her eyes. She was watching a waitress, a woman moving with a quiet grace that seemed to defy the room's stiff formality. The waitress, Maya, was the only black employee he could see on the floor. She moved between tables, not with the harried energy of a server, but with the focused calm of a dancer. She cleared plates, refilled water glasses, and offered a brief, genuine smile to an elderly man, all without breaking the rhythm of her own private melody. As she passed their table, her eyes met Lily's for a fleeting second. It wasn't a look of pity, the look Lily received from everyone else. It was a look of simple, direct acknowledgement. One person seeing another. And then, the unthinkable happened. Lily pushed her chair back. The sound of its legs scraping against the polished marble was a gunshot in the silent room. She stood, her small body trembling slightly as she found her balance. The metal of her brace caught the light, a stark, mechanical thing in a room of soft textures and muted colors. Conversation at surrounding tables faltered. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Dozens of eyes fixed on the small girl. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Maya, who had paused her work a few feet away. With a deep breath that seemed to take all the courage in her small frame, Lily extended a trembling hand. Would you dance with me?" The silence that followed was no longer expensive. It was thick, heavy, and judgmental. "Sir, control your child," a sharp voice cut through the tension. The manager, a man with a name tag that read Mr. Thompson, was striding towards them, his face a mask of appalled disapproval. "This is a fine dining establishment, not a playground. Our staff are not here for entertainment." Ethan's blood ran cold. The public shame, the exposure it was his worst-case scenario realized. His training screamed at him, neutralize the threat, secure the asset, retreat to a defensible position. "Lily, sit down, now." The order was iron, forged in the deserts of Afghanistan. But Lily's hand remained in the air, a fragile offering. Maya Jordan looked from the furious manager to the stone-faced ex-soldier, and then to the little girl whose hope was visibly wilting. For 5 years, Maya had learned to be invisible in places like this, to anticipate needs and fade into the background. Invisibility was survival, but not tonight. She calmly placed the tray of empty glasses she was holding onto a nearby service stand. Then, To the astonishment of everyone in the room, she unknotted the crisp white apron from around her waist, folded it neatly, and placed it on the tray. "I can't dance in an apron," she said, her voice clear and steady. She turned to Lily, and a smile bloomed on her face, warm and radiant, a stark contrast to the room's icy decorum. She took Lily's small, outstretched hand. "I would be honored." Ethan shot to his feet. "What do you think you're doing?" Maya met his gaze, her own dark eyes holding no fear, only a quiet resolve. "I'm accepting an invitation, sir." Before anyone could intervene, Lily took a hesitant step forward. Her foot dragged, the metal of the brace making a faint, painful screech against the floor. But Maya didn't pull her. She didn't guide or correct her. She simply adjusted her own stance, her own rhythm, to match the girls. She let Lily lead. They took one step, then another. It wasn't a dance, not really. It was a slow, clumsy shuffle in the small space between tables. A woman at the next table whispered, "She's going to be fired." But Ethan wasn't listening. He was paralyzed, struck by a memory so vivid it felt like a physical blow. His wife, Sarah, dancing with a 4-year-old Lily in their sun-drenched living room long before the accident. "It's not about perfection, Ethan," Sarah had said, laughing as Lily stomped on her feet. "It's about connection." He watched as something shifted in his daughter's eyes. The fear was replaced by intense concentration. The shame gave way to a shy, fierce pride. For the first time since the crash, Lily wasn't being managed, or helped, or fixed. She was leading. After 3 more shaky steps, the small journey was over. Maya led Lily back to her chair. "Thank you for the dance," she said formally, as if speaking to a respected partner. "It was a pleasure." As Maya turned to retrieve her apron and disappear, Ethan's voice cut through the air, different than before, almost unrecognizable even to himself. "Wait." She stopped, her back to him. The entire restaurant seemed to be holding its breath. "What's your full name?" "Maya Jordan, sir." He nodded slowly, repeating the name as if committing it to memory. Maya Jordan. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket, withdrew a sleek black business card, and held it out. "My office. Tomorrow. 10 a.m." Maya took the card, her hands steady, but Ethan saw the slight tremor in her fingers before she closed them around it. She gave a single, curt nod and walked away without another word. "Dad?" Lily's voice was small, pulling him from his trance. "Why did you do that?" The question hung in the air. Ethan looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and for a moment, he didn't see a patient to be managed or a fragile object to be protected. He saw a person whose silent plea for freedom he had just witnessed a complete stranger answer, while he, her father, had tried to silence it. He had no answer for her. He only knew that the carefully constructed walls of his world had just been breached. Not by an enemy he could fight, but by a quiet act of grace. And he had to understand why. The drive back to the penthouse was a study in contrasts. The sterile silence of the restaurant had been replaced by a low, happy humming from the back seat. Lily, who usually sat rigid and quiet on car rides, was tracing patterns on the fogged-up window, her small tune, a wordless retelling of her brief moment of freedom. For the first time, in what felt like an eternity, the air inside the armored Maybach didn't feel like a tomb. It felt lighter. Ethan's hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The feeling terrified him. Control was predictable. Control was safe. This new lightness was an unknown variable, an unsecured flank. He had spent 2 years building a fortress around Lily, and a waitress with a kind smile had walked right through the main gate in under 5 minutes. He put Lily to bed, going through their meticulous nightly routine. Medication, a gentle stretching regimen prescribed by a physical therapist who charged $1,000 an hour, a final check of the monitors beside her bed. But tonight, as he was about to leave, Lily spoke from the darkness. "She had nice eyes, Daddy." Ethan paused at the door. "Go to sleep, Lily." "They weren't sad eyes," she persisted, her voice soft but clear. "Everyone else looks at me with sad eyes. Hers were just seeing eyes." He closed the door without a word, the observation echoing in the cavernous silence of his own mind. Seeing eyes. Sleep was out of the question. Adrenaline, a long-dormant beast, was prowling through his veins. He strode into his home office, a room that looked more like a command center than a study, and sat before a bank of monitors. He didn't call his security chief. This required a more personal touch. Using a secure, encrypted network, he began his own investigation into Maya Jordan. The initial data was sparse, almost insultingly normal. She lived in a walk-up in the South Side, a world away from his Gold Coast penthouse. She had no criminal record, no significant debt, no social media presence to speak of. She worked 2 jobs, the fine dining gig at the Pinnacle and a weekend shift at a dusty independent bookstore. A ghost. A nobody. But Ethan hadn't survived 3 tours by accepting surface-level intelligence. He dug deeper, cross-referencing public records, charity databases, and leaked city permits. And at 2:17 a.m., he found it. A single digital footprint he had almost missed. A lapsed application for nonprofit status under the name Rhythm and Reach. The purpose listed was community-based therapeutic movement for at-risk youth. The application had been denied due to incomplete paperwork. He kept digging. He found a grainy photo from a local community newsletter dated 4 years ago. It was a picture of a small group at a street fair. In the center was a younger Maya, her arm around a small boy in a wheelchair. Ethan zoomed in. The boy was smiling, but his legs were thin, atrophied. And strapped to his right leg was a familiar-looking device. Ethan's breath hitched. It wasn't just similar to Lily's brace. It was an older model of the exact same custom-built neuromuscular support system manufactured by a niche Swiss company that worked almost exclusively with high-end pediatric orthopedic specialists. It wasn't the kind of device you found at a community clinic. It was the kind of device that cost more than a new car. This wasn't a coincidence. This was an approach. Calculated, deliberate. The feeling of lightness evaporated, replaced by a cold, familiar fury. He had been played. His daughter had been used as a pawn in some kind of long con. He didn't call. He didn't send a car. He grabbed his keys, bypassed his own bewildered security detail in the lobby, and drove. He tore through the sleeping city, the Maybach, a silent, black predator, gliding from the gleaming towers of the Loop to the gritty, shadowed streets of the South Side. He found her building easily. It was a 3-story brick structure sandwiched between a boarded-up laundromat and a 24-hour convenience store. He parked across the street, the engine, a low hum, and watched. He was back in his element now. Observation, reconnaissance, waiting for the target to reveal themselves. At 2:45 a.m., a late-night bus hissed to a stop at the corner. Maya Jordan got off, pulling her thin coat tighter against the biting Chicago wind. She looked tired, the graceful calm from the restaurant replaced by a weary slump in her shoulders. As she fumbled for her keys under the flickering porch light, Ethan killed the engine and got out of the car. His polished Italian shoes made no sound on the cracked pavement as he crossed the street. Maya Jordan. She spun around, startled, her keys clattering to the ground. Her eyes widened as she recognized him, standing there like an apparition in his perfectly tailored suit, a figure of immense power completely out of place in her world. Fear flickered across her face, quickly replaced by something harder. Defiance. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice tight. He stopped a few feet from her, letting the shadows from the streetlight play across his face. He didn't help her with her keys. He let the silence stretch, a weapon he had perfected in interrogation rooms. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and dangerous, each word a piece of ice. "The performance at the restaurant was very convincing, but the curtain is down. So you're going to tell me, right now, who you are, and what exactly you want with my daughter." The fear in Maya's eyes vanished, extinguished by a wave of weary anger. She bent down, her movements stiff with exhaustion, and collected her keys from the grimy concrete. She didn't look at him. "You think this is a game?" she said, her voice laced with a bitterness that surprised him. "You think I have the time or the energy to orchestrate some elaborate scheme to get your attention? My life isn't a corporate takeover, Mr. Hayes. It's a series of double shifts." She straightened up, jamming her key into the lock of the heavy front door. "If you want to have this conversation, it won't be on the street at 3 a.m. She pushed the door open and glanced back at him, her expression unreadable. "Well, are you coming in, or are you planning to intimidate the entire neighborhood?" Ethan followed her, his senses on high alert. The hallway smelled of old dust and fried onions. The stairs creaked under his weight. He was out of his element, a soldier deep in unknown territory, without backup. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor. It was small, a combined living room and kitchen that was meticulously clean but undeniably worn. The furniture was secondhand, The paint was peeling near the ceiling, but there was a stubborn warmth to the place. The walls, however, were what captured his attention. They weren't decorated with cheap prints or posters. They were covered in corkboards, which were themselves covered in a chaotic collage of children's drawings, anatomical charts of the human spine, and handwritten notes on brightly colored index cards. Proprioception, neuroplasticity, gait re-education through auditory cues. This wasn't just an apartment. It was a war room. This, Maya said, gesturing to the organized chaos around them, is rhythm and reach, or what's left of it. She dropped her bag on a small table and finally turned to face him, crossing her arms. You want to know who I am? I'm the woman who spends 60 hours a week serving overpriced food to people like you, so I can keep the lights on for this. Ethan's eyes narrowed. And the brace. The boy in the photograph. You recognized my daughter's device. It wasn't a question. A shadow passed over Maya's face, a deep and profound sadness that seemed to age her 10 years in a second. She walked over to a small, battered wooden chest in the corner and lifted the lid. She pulled out a thick, leather-bound scrapbook. His name was Leo, she said softly, her voice losing its hard edge. He was my little brother. She opened the book on the small kitchen table. The first page was a picture of a beaming, gap-toothed boy of about 5, chasing a soccer ball in a park. The following pages documented a slow, cruel decline. Pictures of Leo with a slight limp, then with a cane, then in a wheelchair. And finally a picture of him sitting on a hospital bed, smiling bravely. The older model of Lily's brace strapped to his leg. He had a rare form of spinal muscular atrophy, Maya explained, her finger tracing the outline of her brother's face. It's progressive, but with the right physical therapy, the right support, you can manage it. You can have a life. She looked up, and for the first time, Ethan saw the raw, unshielded pain in her eyes. My parents drained their savings. We held bake sales. The church took up collections. We did everything we could, but the specialists, the good ones, they were out of reach. Then we heard about the Hayes Foundation, a beacon of hope for families like ours. Ethan stood rigid, the name of his family's philanthropic arm sounding like an accusation in the small room. The foundation connected us with a doctor, Maya continued, her voice growing cold. Dr. Robert Albright, a star in the pediatric neurology world. He was charming, confident. He said he had a revolutionary new treatment protocol. He convinced us this brace, this expensive piece of technology, was the key. She slammed the scrapbook shut. The sound echoed in the quiet apartment. It wasn't the key, it was a cage. The protocol was too aggressive. It caused muscle tearing, nerve damage. It accelerated everything. I tried to tell him. I brought him articles, research I found online. He called me a hysterical, uneducated girl. He told my parents I was in denial. Her voice broke, and she took a sharp breath to steady it. Leo died 6 months after that picture was taken. He was 9 years old. The first major twist hit Ethan with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a shakedown, it was a haunting. So, yes, Mr. Hayes. I recognize the brace, Maya said, her eyes burning into his. I saw it on your daughter in that restaurant, and it was like seeing a ghost. And in her eyes, I saw the same thing I used to see in Leo's, a kid who just wanted to move. I didn't approach her for your money, I did it for him. She walked to one of the corkboards and pulled off an old, faded index card. It was a note, written in a child's scrawl. She held it out to Ethan. One day I will dance, it read. He wrote that a week before he passed, she whispered. I didn't dance with Lily to get to you. I danced with her because my brother never got the chance. Ethan stared at the childish handwriting, then back at Maya. His entire theory of the situation, the calculated con, the play for money had just been dismantled piece by piece. He had come here tonight as a predator, a man of power ready to expose a fraud. Instead, he found himself standing in a makeshift shrine, face to face with a truth far more complicated and painful than he could have imagined. For the first time in years, the tactical part of his brain went silent. There was no enemy here. There was only a woman's grief, a brother's last wish, and the chilling realization that his family's celebrated philanthropy might have a body count. Ethan drove away from Maya's apartment as the first gray light of dawn began to dilute the Chicago skyline. He felt like a man who had just walked through a minefield and only realized it after reaching the other side. The name Dr. Robert Albright was a splinter in his mind. Albright was not just a doctor. He was the head of pediatric neurology at Northwestern Memorial, a man his own father championed, a frequent guest at Hayes Foundation galas. He returned to his penthouse, the silence now feeling less like peace and more like a vacuum of truth. He stood for a long time by Lily's door, listening to the soft, rhythmic sound of her breathing. The brace, which he had always seen as a symbol of hope and recovery, now looked like a shackle. His phone buzzed, shattering the quiet. The caller ID was a single imperious word. Father. Ethan let it buzz 3 times before answering. Yes? I just got off the phone with Thompson from the Pinnacle. Arthur Hayes' voice boomed through the speaker, a voice accustomed to buying and selling companies before breakfast. There were no pleasantries. There never were. He tells me you allowed some waitress to make a spectacle of my granddaughter. She was a child who wanted to dance, Ethan said, his voice flat. She is a Hayes. She is not a spectacle. And you, Ethan, are her guardian. Your one responsibility is to maintain the integrity of that position, something you seem spectacularly incapable of doing. First, you trade a boardroom for a barracks, and now you're letting the help dictate your daughter's activities. The condescension was a familiar poison. It's not your concern. Lily is my blood. Her well-being is very much my concern, Arthur shot back, and her well-being is tied to the best care money can buy, care that I provide. Dr. Albright is the foremost expert in the country. He has a plan. Your job is to follow it, not to indulge the whims of service staff. The name landed like a stone in Ethan's gut. I spoke with her, he said, deliberately omitting the details. The waitress. You did what? Arthur's voice dropped, the bluster replaced by a chilling quiet. You engaged with her? Ethan, for God's sake. She's a predator. She sees the name, she sees the money. I've already had my legal team look into her. A nobody from the South Side with a defunct nonprofit. I've instructed them to send her a cease and desist. Any further contact with you or Lily will result in immediate legal action. Is that clear? A wall of ice was being erected, swift and efficient. This was how his father operated. Problems weren't solved. They were erased. Her name is Maya Jordan, Ethan said, the words tasting like defiance. Her brother was a patient of Dr. Albright's. He died. A beat of silence. It was the only hesitation Ethan had heard from his father in years. Unfortunate, yes, Arthur said finally, his tone dismissive. Medicine isn't an exact science. There are always risks. That has nothing to do with this situation. This is an extortion attempt, plain and simple. I have handled it. You will not contact her again. The line went dead. Ethan stood there, the phone heavy in his hand. I have handled it. 3 words that had defined his entire life. 3 words that had covered up his teenage mistakes, smoothed over his rebellious choices, and now sought to bury a dead boy and a grieving sister. For years, he had fought against his father's control by escaping to the military, to the front lines, to anywhere the Hayes name meant less than his rank. But now, the battle had followed him home. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about Lily. It was about the look in her eyes when she had danced. He pulled up the contact information his network had found for Maya Jordan. He hesitated for only a moment, the ingrained discipline of a soldier warring with the nascent instinct of a father. Then, he made a call. Maya answered on the second ring, her voice wary. Hello? It's Ethan Hayes. He got straight to the point. My father is sending his lawyers after you. A cease and desist. He heard her take a sharp breath. Of course he is. He knows who you are. He's trying to bury this. He paused. I'm offering you a way out. A consulting fee. A significant one. Name your price. You can sign an NDA, move on, and use the money to fund whatever you want. You never have to deal with my family again. It was a test. The kind of offer his father would make. He needed to know, for certain, who she was. The silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but unshakable. Mr. Hayes, you still don't get it. This was never about money. This is about what's right. She took a breath. I don't want your money. Lily doesn't need another paid specialist to follow a pre-written script. She needs a safe space to find her own rhythm. My offer stands. Bring her to the center, no charge, no strings. She added one last thing before he could respond. But if you're bringing her because you feel guilty, or because you're trying to defy your father, then don't bother. Bring her because you believe she deserves a chance to be more than just a patient. She hung up. Ethan lowered the phone, his father's threats and Maya's challenge ringing in his ears. He was standing at a crossroads. One path was paved with his family's immense wealth and power, a smooth, easy road that led to silence and complicity. The other was an unknown, unpaved track leading to a rundown community center in the south side. He walked to the window and looked down at the city below. For the first time, he wasn't looking at it like a general surveying a map. He was looking at it like a man trying to find his way. He made a decision. It was impulsive, illogical, and a complete violation of his father's direct order. It was the most honest thing he had done in years. The next afternoon, Ethan drove a nondescript SUV, not the Maybach, across the invisible line that divided Chicago's north and south sides. Each block felt like a descent into a different reality. The gleaming steel and glass towers gave way to brick and weathered stone, the manicured parks to chain-link fences and cracked asphalt. In the passenger seat, Lily was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than usual. It was the alert stillness of a scout, not a prisoner. "Are we going to see the dancing lady?" she asked, her voice small. "Her name is Maya," Ethan corrected gently. And yes, Rhythm and Reach was housed in a former VFW hall, a squat brick building with boarded-up windows on the ground floor. The entrance was a side door with peeling paint that led up a narrow flight of stairs. The entire place felt temporary, as if it could be swept away by a strong wind. Ethan's instincts screamed at him. The lack of security, the structural vulnerabilities, the unknown population. It was a tactical nightmare. He pushed open the door at the top of the stairs, and they were hit by a wall of sound and color. The space was a large, open room with high ceilings and worn wooden floors. It was loud. It was chaotic. A dozen children, each with a different visible challenge. Wheelchairs, walkers, prosthetic limbs, braces like Lily's were moving to the rhythm of an upbeat funk song blasting from a pair of large, mismatched speakers. Some were spinning, some were stomping, some were just waving their arms. There were no lines, no drills, no obvious instructor. It was a joyful anarchy. Ethan, a man who lived by structure and protocol, felt an immediate visceral discomfort. This wasn't therapy. This was chaos. But Lily was transfixed. Her eyes, wide with wonder, darted around the room, taking in everything. She wasn't seeing disability. She was seeing movement. She was seeing fun. Maya emerged from the happy fray, a smile on her face. She was dressed simply in sweatpants and a t-shirt with the words Wraith and Reach printed in bold, simple letters. She knelt, bringing herself to Lily's eye level. "Hi, Lily. I'm so glad you came." Lily looked at Ethan, a silent question in her eyes. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was the hardest thing he'd done all day. He was relinquishing control. "Do you want to join in?" Maya asked. "There's no right or wrong way to move here. Just your way." Lily hesitated for a moment, her hand clutching her father's. Then she let go. She took a tentative step onto the dance floor, her brace making a soft click on the wood. A boy in a souped-up power wheelchair, decorated with flame decals, zoomed past her, spinning in a tight circle. He grinned at her. Lily's lips curved into a small, shy smile in return. Maya didn't hover. She moved back to the edge of the room, her eyes scanning the group, offering a word of encouragement here, a high five there. She approached Ethan, who was standing stiffly by the door, his arms crossed, a sentinel at the edge of a world he didn't understand. "Breathe, Captain," she said quietly. "She's not made of glass." "This is unstructured," he said, the word tasting like a criticism. "The structure is internal," Maya replied, her gaze on the children. "We don't impose it. We help them find their own. The goal isn't a perfect pirouette. It's for that boy over there to improve his core strength so he can sit up straighter. It's for that girl to work on her balance so she's less afraid of falling at school. It's for your daughter to learn that her body is not her enemy." Ethan watched as Lily, drawn by the music, began to sway. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, a slight rocking from side to side. Then, she lifted her arms, mimicking a girl nearby who was pretending to be an airplane. A moment later, the inevitable happened. Trying to copy a spin, Lily's braced leg didn't pivot correctly. Her balance faltered, and she tumbled to the floor in a heap. Ethan's body tensed. He started forward, every protective instinct firing at once. But Maya put a hand gently on his arm. "Wait," she whispered. "Watch." He froze. On the floor, Lily looked momentarily stunned. He saw the familiar flicker of frustration and shame cross her face. He braced himself for the tears. But they didn't come. The boy with the flame-decaled wheelchair rolled over to her. He didn't offer a hand. He just stopped beside her and said, "Whoa, cool fall. Can you do it again?" Lily looked up at him, surprised. A small giggle escaped her lips. She pushed herself up onto her hands and knees. It was a struggle. Her arms trembled with the effort. But no one rushed to help her. The other kids just kept dancing around her. They gave her space. Finally, with a determined grunt, she got one foot under her and pushed herself back up to a standing position. She was a little dusty, and her face was flushed, but she was smiling. A real, genuine, triumphant smile. Ethan felt something in his chest crack open. The cage of guilt and fear he had built around his heart for 2 years suddenly felt impossibly tight. He had hired the best specialists, the most renowned doctors, all focused on preventing her from falling. He had spent a fortune to keep her from this exact moment. And in doing so, he had robbed her of the victory of getting back up on her own. He had been so focused on her limitations that he had never given her a chance to discover her own strength. He looked from his daughter, now attempting another, more careful spin, to Maya, who was watching him with those damn seeing eyes. He had come here to assess a threat. He was beginning to realize the only threat in Lily's life was him. The drive home was different this time. Lily was exhausted but buzzing with energy, chattering nonstop about the other kids. She talked about a girl named Chloe who could do a wheelchair wheelie, and the boy with the rocket chair who had challenged her to a race. She didn't mention her fall once. For the first time, an event in her day was defined by the joy surrounding it, not the pain within it. Ethan listened, a quiet observer. The change in her was palpable. It was like watching a black and white photograph slowly bleed into color. This single, chaotic hour had done more for her spirit than 2 years of sterile, regimented therapy. That night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan didn't go to his command center. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, his first in months, and sat in the dark, the city lights spread out beneath him. Maya's words echoed in his mind. The structure is internal. He had spent his life imposing external structures on everything, on his troops, on his home, on his daughter. The idea of letting something grow from the inside out was foreign, unsettling, and undeniably compelling. A question began to form, a dangerous splinter of doubt. If Maya, with no resources and a makeshift studio, could achieve this, what exactly had Dr. Albright and the full financial might of the Hayes Foundation been doing for 2 years? The doubt hardened into resolve. The next day, he didn't go to his office. He went to the downtown headquarters of the Hayes Foundation. As a board member and the founder's son, he had level 7 access, a clearance his father assumed he would never use. He walked past the polished granite walls and the oil paintings of his ancestors, his face an unreadable mask. He wasn't looking for financial records. He was looking for buried truths. In a climate-controlled digital archive in the sub-basement, he began his search. He started with Dr. Albright. The records were pristine. Glowing reports, successful outcomes, multi-million-dollar grants awarded unanimously by the board. It was a perfect record. Too perfect. Then he searched for rhythm and reach. The system found it instantly. An application from 4 years ago. He opened the file, expecting to see a detailed rejection, a clinical analysis from the Foundation's medical review board explaining why it was unsuitable. Instead, he found a single-page summary. The application itself, which he could see was detailed and included letters of support from community leaders, was attached but marked as unread. The summary page contained a single, damning note, time-stamped and initialed by the Foundation's executive director, a man loyal to his father. The note read, "Applicant motivation questionable. Potential for liability. Not aligned with Foundation's strategic focus on clinically proven methodologies. Recommend archival, without full board review." Beneath it, scrawled in the familiar, sharp handwriting of his father, were 2 words. As recommended. A.H. Ethan stared at the screen, the blood draining from his face. The proposal hadn't been rejected. It had been suffocated. It was never even presented to the board. His father had personally ensured it was buried before it ever saw the light of day. He had lied to him. The feeling of betrayal was sharp and acidic. He had assumed his father was merely dismissive. He hadn't considered he would be actively deceitful. Why? To protect Albright? To maintain control? He printed the document, the hum of the machine sounding like a war drum in the silent archive. He felt a surge of cold fury. He needed to confront Maya, to show her this, to, what? Apologize? Warn her? He wasn't sure. He only knew that this piece of paper changed everything. He found her at the center that afternoon, mopping the floor after the kids had left. The room was quiet now, smelling of sweat and floor cleaner. She looked up as he entered, her expression wary. "Lily's not with me," he said, getting straight to the point. He held out the printed document. "I found this in the Foundation's archives." Maya took the paper, her brow furrowed in confusion. She read the summary, her eyes scanning the clinical, dismissive language. Then she saw the initials. A.H. A look of profound hurt crossed her face, deeper than the anger he'd expected. It was the look of someone whose last, faint ember of hope had just been stomped out. "He didn't even read it," she whispered, her voice hollow. She looked up at Ethan, her eyes searching his. "Did you know? Is this why you're here? To show me how powerless I am against your family?" The accusation hit him squarely. He had come here in a storm of his own anger, wanting to expose his father's treachery. He hadn't considered how this revelation would land on her. For him, it was a betrayal. For her, it was confirmation that her brother's life, her life's work, was worth less than a scribble on a piece of paper to a man like Arthur Hayes. "No," Ethan said, his voice strained. "I just found it. I thought you should know the truth." "The truth?" She gave a short, bitter laugh, dropping the paper onto a nearby table as if it were contaminated. "The truth is that people like your father decide who gets a chance and who gets archived. The truth is that you and I live in different worlds, Mr. Hayes. And I was a fool to think for a second that we could ever meet in the middle." A chasm had opened between them, wider and deeper than the city blocks that separated their homes. He had come to share a discovery, hoping it would make them allies. Instead, he had just handed her the proof that they would always be adversaries. The chill between them lasted for 2 weeks. Ethan continued to bring Lily to the center, but his interactions with Maya were clipped and formal. He would drop Lily off with a curt nod and pick her up with a transactional "thank you." The fragile bridge of understanding they had started to build had been washed away, leaving only the cold, hard facts of their separate worlds. He was the son of the man who had dismissed her life's work. She was the woman who saw him as an extension of that same indifferent power. Yet, he kept coming back. He couldn't deny the change in Lily. She was more confident, more verbal. Her physical therapist, the one who charged $1,000 an hour, noted with detached surprise that her balance and core strength had improved more in the last month than in the previous year. She attributed it to a delayed response to her own regimen. Ethan knew better. Meanwhile, Arthur Hayes was not idle. He was a man who believed that problems, like insurgencies, needed to be crushed decisively. His son's continued defiance was a direct challenge to his authority, and this Maya Jordan was the root cause. He wouldn't just silence her with lawyers. He would discredit her entirely. He would make an example of her. His plan was a masterpiece of corporate warfare, executed with military precision. It began with a call to Dr. Robert Albright. "Robert," Arthur said, his voice smooth as silk, "I have a small community outreach project for you, a chance to demonstrate the importance of evidence-based medicine, and, incidentally, to remind my son which side his bread is buttered on." Next, he activated his public relations team. He leaked a carefully worded story to a prominent Chicago Tribune columnist, a story about a concerned grandfather worried that his vulnerable, disabled granddaughter was being exploited by an unlicensed and charismatic charlatan, offering miracle cures in a low-income neighborhood. The story didn't name names, but the details were specific enough to be unmistakable to anyone in their circle. The final piece was the ambush itself. Arthur scheduled it for a Thursday afternoon, a day he knew the center would be at its busiest. That Thursday, the atmosphere at Rhythm and Reach was electric. The kids were practicing a loose routine for a small showcase they were planning for their parents. The energy was high, the room filled with laughter and music. Ethan stood in his usual spot by the door, a silent guardian, the tension with Maya, a low hum beneath the joyful noise. At precisely 4:15 p.m., the door swung open. Arthur Hayes strode in, not in a business suit, but in a cashmere sweater and tailored slacks, the uniform of benevolent, old money authority. Flanking him were two people. The first was Dr. Albright, looking clinical and severe in a starched white coat worn over his suit. The second was the columnist from the Tribune, a woman with a sharp, predatory gaze, followed closely by a photographer. The music faltered as Maya turned, her eyes widening in disbelief. The children fell silent, sensing the sudden shift in the room's energy. "Arthur," Ethan said, stepping forward, his voice a low warning. "What is this?" "This is an intervention, son," Arthur announced, his voice projecting across the room, full of performative concern. "I am a grandfather, worried for his granddaughter's safety, and as the chairman of the Hayes Foundation, I have a duty to protect the public from fraudulent and potentially dangerous practices." He turned his attention to Maya, who stood frozen in the center of the room. "Miss Jordan, I am Arthur Hayes. I believe you are familiar with my foundation's work." Dr. Albright stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Miss Jordan," he began, his tone condescendingly academic, "I've reviewed your methods. There is no peer-reviewed data, no clinical trials, no basis in established medical science for this expressive play. You are giving these families false hope, and quite frankly, endangering these children by encouraging movements that could exacerbate their conditions." The Tribune columnist was scribbling furiously in her notepad, the photographer's camera already clicking, capturing Maya's stunned face, the shabby surroundings, the powerful men cornering her. They ganged up on her, a pincer movement designed to crush her. Arthur, the voice of financial power and civic duty. Albright, the voice of medical authority. The press, the voice of public opinion. These children are on strict, carefully calibrated treatment plans, Albright continued, his voice rising. What you do here is reckless. It undermines legitimate therapy. Where is your proof of efficacy? Where are your credentials? You have none. You are, to be blunt, a fraud. The word hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. The children looked scared, glancing between their parents and the intimidating intruders. Maya was surrounded, trapped in the center of her own sanctuary. She looked at Ethan, her eyes filled with a silent, burning question. Are you with them, or are you with me? Ethan felt the world narrow to that single point. His father's cold, expectant gaze, Albright's smug superiority, the reporter's hungry eyes, and Maya, standing alone, her life's work about to be torn apart in a carefully orchestrated public execution. His blood ran cold. The trap had not been set for Maya alone. It had been set for him, too. The silence in the room was a physical weight, pressing down on everyone. Dr. Albright's accusation fraud echoed off the worn wooden floors. The photographer's lens was a predatory eye, moving from Maya's pale face to the anxious children huddled near their parents. Arthur Hayes stood like a Roman emperor in his cashmere sweater, watching his strategy unfold with icy satisfaction. Maya's hands were clenched into fists at her sides. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. How could she defend herself against this? How could she explain the science of hope to men who only believed in balance sheets and peer-reviewed studies? Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline, the cold, clear focus of a combat situation. He saw the tactical layout, his father, the commander, Albright, the heavy artillery, the press, the air support, and Maya, an unarmed civilian in the kill zone. He was a trained soldier, and he was letting a civilian take fire. The shame was a physical taste in his mouth. He was about to move, to say something, anything to break the siege, but a small movement near the speakers caught his eye. It was Lily. While all eyes were on the adults, she had quietly maneuvered herself next to the old boombox on a folding table. No one had noticed her. She was, as always, underestimated. She looked at her father, her blue eyes wide and serious. It was a look he recognized. It was the same look she'd given him in the restaurant just before she'd asked Maya to dance a look of quiet, desperate resolve. Then she looked at her grandfather, at the cold, imposing man who visited on holidays and sent expensive, impersonal gifts. She looked at Dr. Albright, the man who made her perform repetitive, painful exercises in his sterile office. And with a decisive push of a small finger, she hit the play button. The raw, joyful energy of the funk song blasted through the speakers, shattering the tense silence. It was an act of pure, childish rebellion. Arthur shot her a look of pure fury. "Lily, turn that off this instant." But Lily ignored him. She turned away from the boombox and took a few awkward, determined steps toward the center of the room. She stopped in the open space, a small figure in a battlefield of adult egos. She closed her eyes, just as Maya had taught her. She wasn't listening to the men. She was listening to the music. Then, she began to move. It started with a sway, a simple shifting of weight, from her good leg to the one in the brace. Her arms lifted, not with perfect grace, but with intention. She was a tree in the wind. She took a step, then another. It was the little routine she had been practicing, a sequence of 3 forward steps, a pivot, and a small triumphant dip. Dr. Albright scoffed. "This is meaningless. This proves nothing." But then it happened. On the 3rd step, instead of planting her braced foot flatly as she always did, Lily did something different. She rolled through the motion, from heel to toe, in a fluid, controlled movement that was entirely new. Her body, freed by the music and her own defiance, had found a pathway her doctors had never been able to map. For a single, breathtaking second, she held the balance entirely on her braced leg. She wobbled, her arms flailing for a moment to steady herself. And then she took a 4th step. A full, unsupported, independent step. It was shaky, it was imperfect, but it was hers. She landed it. Then, as if the effort had taken everything she had, she slowly lowered herself to sit on the floor, a wide, exhausted, and utterly triumphant grin spreading across her face. A collective gasp went through the room. The parents, who had been watching with anxious fear, erupted into spontaneous applause and cheers. The boy in the rocket chair let out a whoop. The photographer, forgetting his allegiance, swung his camera away from Maya and onto Lily, the flash firing in a rapid staccato, capturing the miracle on the floor. The columnist's jaw was slightly agape, her pen frozen over her notepad. The entire ambush, so perfectly planned, had been completely and utterly derailed by the one person they had all dismissed. The evidence Albright had demanded, the proof of efficacy, had just been delivered by a 7-year-old girl in the most undeniable way possible. Ethan felt the crack in his chest widen into a chasm, letting in a light so bright it almost blinded him. He looked at his daughter, not as a symbol of his failure, but as a warrior in her own right. He looked at Arthur, whose face was a thunderous mask of disbelief and rage. His father hadn't just lost control of the situation, he had lost the war, and he didn't even know it yet. The sound of the applause was a tidal wave, washing over the stunned silence. For a moment, the room was just a celebration, a circle of shared joy around a little girl sitting triumphantly on the floor. But the real world crashed back in as the Tribune columnist found her voice. She turned, her journalistic instincts taking over, and shoved her microphone toward Ethan. "Captain Hayes, that was remarkable. As a board member of the Hayes Foundation and as her father, what's your comment on what we just witnessed?" This was the moment, the crossfire. Every eye in the room swiveled to him. His father's gaze was a laser beam, filled with a silent, furious command. "Shut this down. Fix this. Now." Doctor Albright looked pale, his clinical arrogance shattered. Maya watched him, her expression stripped of all its previous defenses, raw and vulnerable, her hope for this place, for these kids, hanging on his next words. The soldier in him analyzed the terrain. His father had created this battlefield, expecting him to fall in line. He had 2 choices. He could follow orders, minimize the event, praise Doctor Albright's foundational work, dismiss this as a fluke, and retreat, saving face and preserving the family's unified, powerful front. It was the safe move, the Hayes move. Or he could disobey. He looked down at Lily, who was now being hugged by the girl who had taught her to be an airplane. Her smile was the purest thing he had ever seen. It was a beacon. He made his choice. Ethan didn't look at the reporter. He walked past her, past the photographer, and into the center of the room. He knelt beside Maya, creating a new line of defense, a new front. He put a hand on her shoulder, a silent, public gesture of allegiance. Then he looked directly at his father. For years, Ethan began, his voice quiet, but carrying the unmistakable authority of a man who had led others into battle. "I've lived by a code. I followed orders. I respected the chain of command. I believed in the mission." He stood up, turning to face the reporter, but keeping his eyes locked on Arthur. "But the most important mission a soldier or a father is ever given is to protect the innocent. And to speak the truth. Especially when it's hard." He took a deep breath. "My daughter just took a step that her multi-million-dollar, clinically proven therapy said was impossible for at least another year. She didn't do it in a sterile lab. She did it right here, on this floor, surrounded by joy, not judgment." He turned his gaze to Dr. Albright, who flinched. "She did it because Miss Jordan here gave her something that no specialist ever did. The freedom to fail. the space to find her own strength. Then, he delivered the killing blow. He looked back at the stunned columnist. "The Hayes Foundation was wrong," he said, the words clear and unequivocal. When it buried Miss Jordan's proposal 4 years ago, it was wrong. When it chose to fund established names instead of innovative ideas, it was wrong. When it prioritized reputation over results, it was wrong. He paused, letting the weight of his admission sink in. This wasn't just a disagreement. This was a public schism, a civil war declared in front of the press. "And I was wrong," he continued, his voice softening as he looked at Maya, "for being silent for so long." He faced the reporter again, his decision now absolute. "Effective immediately, I am liquidating a significant portion of my personal shares in Hayes Industries. The proceeds will be used to establish a new charitable trust, a trust with one purpose: to fund and expand community-based programs like this one, programs that value human connection over clinical distance." He looked back at Maya, a promise in his eyes. "The first and largest grant from this trust will go to Rhythm and Reach, enough to secure a new facility, to hire staff, and to ensure that no child is ever turned away for lack of funds." "Ethan!" Arthur's voice was a roar of disbelief and fury. "You are throwing your legacy away on this sentimentality." "No, Father," Ethan said, turning to him one last time. The fear he had carried for a lifetime was gone, burned away by the fire of his conviction. "I'm not throwing it away. I'm finally building one of my own." He had chosen his side. He had defied the command structure. In the middle of his father's perfectly planned ambush, he had just staged a coup. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The Tribune article, published the next morning, was a bombshell. It wasn't the expose on a fraudulent charity Arthur Hayes had intended. Instead, it was the story of a billionaire heir's stunning rebellion, a David and Goliath tale featuring a determined community organizer and a little girl who danced against the odds. The Hayes Foundation was thrown into a PR crisis, while donations to a hastily set-up fund for Rhythm and Reach flooded in from across the country. Arthur Hayes did not retreat quietly. He fought back with the ferocity of a wounded lion. He tried to freeze Ethan's assets, citing mental incompetence. He launched a smear campaign against Maya in the financial press. But the tide had turned. The court of public opinion, and a key clause in the Hayes family, trust Ethan's mother had insisted upon years ago, was on Ethan's side. The coup was successful. 6 months later, the new Rhythm and Reach Center opened its doors. It was a bright, airy, and fully accessible space in a repurposed warehouse, designed with input from Maya, the parents, and even the kids themselves. There were sprung floors, sensory walls, and an outdoor area where a wheelchair-accessible garden was already taking root. Ethan was a different man. The rigid, haunted soldier was gone, replaced by someone more present, more open. He was a regular presence at the center, not as a brooding observer, but as an active participant. He helped with paperwork, he learned the names of all the children, and he occasionally joined in the warm-ups, his movements endearingly clumsy. He and Maya had found a new rhythm, a partnership built on mutual respect and a shared mission. The tension between them had dissolved, replaced by the easy camaraderie of two people fighting in the same trench. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place during the legal discovery for Ethan's new trust. His lawyers, tasked with vetting all future partnerships, conducted a deep-dive investigation into Dr. Albright's practice as a matter of due diligence. What they found was far worse than professional arrogance. "It's not just that his protocol for Leo Jordan was overly aggressive," his lead lawyer told him, sliding a file across a conference table. "It was experimental, and he never got proper informed consent. He was using high-paying patients from the foundation as guinea pigs to gather data for a patent he was developing." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "And Lily?" "Worse," the lawyer said grimly. "We subpoenaed her original diagnostic scans from the hospital, not just Albright's patient files. We had them independently reviewed by a team at Johns Hopkins. Dr. Albright's initial assessment of Lily's potential for recovery was deliberately pessimistic. He falsified parts of her prognosis. The final twist landed, cold and sickening. "Why?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "To justify a longer, more expensive, and more technologically dependent treatment plan," the lawyer explained. "He had a financial stake in the Swiss company that manufactures her brace. He wasn't just treating her, he was monetizing her. According to the Johns Hopkins review, with the right therapy, Lily's prognosis was always significantly better than he ever let on. The betrayal was absolute. It wasn't just negligence. It was calculated, predatory greed, wrapped in the comforting authority of a white coat and sponsored by his own family's foundation. Armed with irrefutable proof, Ethan and Maya, on behalf of her brother's estate, joined a class action lawsuit. Dr. Albright was stripped of his medical license, his reputation destroyed. Arthur Hayes, facing catastrophic legal and financial exposure for his foundation's role in promoting and protecting Albright, finally retreated into a self-imposed exile. His empire of control crumbled to dust. The story culminated on the evening of the new center's first public showcase. The space was filled with families, donors, and community members. Ethan sat in the front row, not in a suit, but in a simple polo shirt. The final performance was a group piece. In the center of it all was Lily. She now wore only a single, lightweight support on her right leg, more for stability than necessity. She moved with a joyful, fluid confidence that brought tears to his eyes. She was not just dancing, she was soaring. After the performance, Maya came and stood beside him, watching the kids celebrate on stage. "Her brother would be so proud of you," Ethan said quietly. Maya smiled, a real unguarded smile. "He'd be proud of all of us." She looked at him. "You know, I never properly thanked you." "For what?" he asked. "I was just following orders from a new commanding officer." He nodded toward Lily, who was now showing a younger child how to do the dip from her first routine. The Tribune columnist from that fateful day, now a staunch supporter of the center, approached them. "Mr. Hayes, an incredible night. Looking back, what's the biggest lesson you've learned through all of this?" Ethan looked at his daughter on the stage, a leader in her own right. He thought of the rigid cage he had built and the simple act of grace that had shattered it. "That true strength isn't about control," he said, his voice clear and steady. "It's not about building walls to keep the world out. It's about having the courage to tear them down." He glanced at Maya, a shared understanding passing between them. "It's about learning when to lead and when to have the wisdom to follow someone else's rhythm."